Hi friends, I'm back. It's me, Mish. Welcome to my channel, Read with Mish. Okay, happy new year. Oh my gosh, happy 2026. I hope this year brings us all a lot of love and a lot of joy and a lot of warmth, because man, what a year 2025 was, and how quickly the time is flying is actually so insane. I haven't been here in a hot minute, but now I'm back and it's a new year, so I thought I would talk about some of the books that I read in 2025. So in 2025 I read 59 books. My goal was 50, so I beat my goal, but it's really not about that. I just had a really good reading year. Some months better than others for sure. It was not a steady rhythm, but it definitely ebbed and flowed as the waves do. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about every single book because I don't really want to, but I thought I would talk about some that stood out to me, series, things like that. So in 2025, I read 3 trilogies. The first series, I guess, that I read this year was, the first series that I read in 2025 that I want to talk about was Mistborn Era 1 by Brandon Sanderson. I really enjoyed these books. I think what I am really impressed with about Mistborn and about Sanderson in general, I guess, is his capacity to world build without making it feel dry or boring or slow. So I think his approach to building a whole fantasy world is super approachable, and I think that is very impressive, and I really appreciated that, and I really enjoyed what I was reading. So yeah, I would recommend. I am excited to read more of his works. I've yet to dive into the rest of the Cosmere. I haven't picked up Stormlight. I haven't picked up Mistborn Era 2, but maybe this year in 2026 I will get to some of that. But yeah, I loved Mistborn Era 1. I would recommend it if you are at all curious about Sanderson. I also read the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. R.F. Kuang at this point is a pretty household name, I think, on BookTube and on Book Talk and whatnot. I haven't read any of her other works, honestly. I have Babel on my shelf. I'm curious about it. These books, this trilogy, it was okay. It didn't meet my expectations, unfortunately. I think there were a lot of good ideas. I think I just wanted more. I wish that she had gone deeper, but then again, I wasn't writing and publishing books when I was 16, so what can I really say, you know? The first book was okay. The second book I quite enjoyed. The third book, in my opinion, did not need to exist, so do with that information what you will. And then the last series that I want to talk about is the Lady Astronaut trilogy by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is the trilogy that I read the most recently, so that's the Calculating Stars, the Fated Sky, and the Relentless Moon. And I didn't know a lot about this series going in, and I will say that it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I knew that it was science fiction, but I thought that it would be perhaps more fantastical, but it's actually historical sci-fi, I guess, is how I would classify it. It's giving Hidden Figures energy, if you're familiar with the movie or with the history that informed the movie. And I really enjoyed it. It really surprised me. The writing was good and approachable, and I really enjoyed the historical components and the themes of gender equality and racial equality, or a lack thereof, within the space industry and also in general, and obviously still very pressing, very relevant issues. So this is a series that I definitely would recommend to everyone. The next category, I guess, that I'm going to talk about is Stephen King. This year, oh my gosh, not this year, in 2025, I read 3 Stephen King books. The first one that I read was way at the beginning of the year. I read The Stand, which is a huge book. It's super thick. It's actually the book that the camera's propped on right now. I've talked about this before. I think I will say it again. I wouldn't say that The Stand is my favorite King that I've ever read, but I will say that it is the most impressive King that I've read, if not one of the most impressive books that I've ever read in general, just because of how it just accomplishes so much. It's a really big book, and I think what Stephen King does so well is characterization. It's really hard to write a solid main character, a solid side character. This book being what it is, the story and the size, features a whole cast, 10 plus main characters, if you will, and they all have their own stories and inner struggles and everything, and we get to see all of that. And I think the way that that's all integrated into the story is so impressive. Mr. King is just the GOAT. I don't know what to say. That being said, I did also read in 2025 Pet Sematary, which I know is a lot of people's favorite King. This one didn't live up to the hype for me. I don't know why. It just didn't really do it for me. I thought the characters were very flat for a Stephen King novel, and I just wasn't super invested, I think, because of that. It was still a good book. It wasn't a bad book. The story is interesting. The characters, I think, needed some work in this one, for me personally. And toward the end of the year, I read Dr. Sleep, which is technically a sequel to The Shining. If you haven't read The Shining, you definitely should. It was so good. And Dr. Sleep, it took me a minute to get into it, but after I got into it, it was a page turner for me. I didn't want to put it down. I was super invested. It's a creepy book, I'm not gonna lie, but somehow I cared about adult Danny in Dr. Sleep even more than I cared about little kid Danny in The Shining. And so I loved his character arc, and I don't know, it's just so well done. If you're curious about reading Dr. Sleep, you definitely should, but read The Shining first. On a totally different note, there were a few books I read this year that were just, oh my gosh, why do I keep saying that? New Year's problems. Okay. On a totally different note, what? There were a few books I read in 2025 that were just super warm and cozy, and that just made me feel good. These are some of the books that I've been recommending to people the most. So the first one is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. It's translated from Japanese. I don't even know what to say. It's a slice of life kind of book, so it's not very plot heavy, but I just fell so in love with the characters, and there is a found family trope in this book, which is my weakness. It's my favorite trope, definitely by far. And I just really fell in love with the characters, and I really loved the messaging of this book, that, you know, like, sometimes we can just love people just because, like, it doesn't matter that they're not blood related family or this and that. We can just, like, care about them as we should as humans, and I just, like, thought that was so sweet and special. So that's a book that I have been recommending to everyone. Another book that I will add in this category is Tress of the Emerald Sea, which is by Brandon Sanderson. It's one of his standalone projects, technically a part of the Cosmere, but as I was saying earlier, I haven't really dived deep into the Cosmere yet, so I'm not sure how it ties into everything. But I am so glad I picked this book up in 2025. I guess I was expecting, because it is a Sanderson novel, I guess I was expecting something a little bit more fast-paced and action-packed, perhaps. While there are some really cool, fantastical, sort of magical elements in this story, what stood out to me the most was, again, this theme of found family and these people who don't really fit in where they come together, and they find a family and like such strong bonds in each other, and like in going through various obstacles together. And it's just such a sweet book. I think it's a book that he initially wrote for his wife and that he didn't initially plan to publish, and I think that really shows, honestly. It's so sweet. There's so much heart in it, and I'm so glad that she convinced him to share it with the world, because it's so special. And if you're thinking about Sanderson and you are hesitant to dive into a whole series, I would recommend Tress as a good starting point. I read quite a few nonfiction books in 2025. My goal was to read one a month, so 12 in total. I don't think I quite hit that. I think I'm at like 10. Anyways, my standout nonfiction books of 2025 were The Whole Picture by Alice Proctor. This book I learned about from Jack Edwards' channel years ago, and it's been on my TBR since then, and I'm glad I read it. I learned a lot for sure, and I would recommend it to anyone who is interested in art and or anyone who likes to go to museums, because it talks a lot about kind of the history behind the art that is featured in museums and how they came to be in these museum collections, and like how colonialism has played a role into how these collections have been shaped. And I just think that's such important insight for anyone who, you know, frequents museums, because museums have their own value, but I think it's important that we know more, right? Because there's always more behind the scenes that isn't necessarily shared when you walk through the front door. Another nonfiction standout for me was Semi-Well-Adjusted, Despite Literally Everything by Alison Stoner, their memoir. There are so many celebrity memoirs that are coming out every year, and I haven't read that many, honestly, but I really appreciated that Alison took this a step further. They didn't just say, oh yeah, this is what it was like growing up as a child star on Disney Channel, right? They went deeper and sort of discussed the harms that came with it, whether intentional or not, conscious at the time or not. And they also then talk a lot about the work that they've done since then, which is very heavily focused on mental health and well-being and safety in the arts and safety in the industry. The fact that there is then sort of a call to action, if you will, or an encouragement to build safer environments for children, for everyone, but especially for children in these artistic and creative environments, I think is so important and incredible. I don't know if that made any sense, but that was that. Last but not least, my most memorable reads of 2025. These are the books that made me think the most and or that I have returned to again and again, that just like won't leave my brain. The first one is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This book is one that has been making its rounds across BookTube, across Book Talk, Instagram, whatever. From what I understand, it's a pretty divisive book in the sense that it's one of those books that you either love it or you hate it. It's not for everyone. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, honestly, but I really, really loved it. It made me think so much about what it means to be human and to be alive and to live another day. And wow, right? Like that's so profound, and that's like my favorite thing, is to think about deep stuff like that. Another book that I will mention is A Night Crawling by Layla Motley. This is, again, another book that has been making its rounds across social media and booktube, and this book definitely lived up to the hype for me. It was so it really hit my heartstrings, this one. It's so real, and it's also very close to home because it takes place in Oakland, which is 30-40 minutes away from the little bubble of a suburb that I grew up in. So it was really, I think, necessary for me to read this as a window into a world that I didn't personally know growing up, but that I know now is like so real all around me. Anyways, Night Crawling by Layla Motley was so beautifully written. It hit my heart. It's just so very real and raw and honest, and I think offers necessary insight into a lifestyle, not even a lifestyle, just like a life circumstance that those of us who have grown up in a more privileged capacity have not personally experienced. It was my only 5-star read of 2025, so I will leave you with that. And then the last book that I want to talk about is called I Want to Be Spaghetti. I am blanking on the name of the author right now. I forgot to write it down, but it'll be up here. Yeah, this is a kid's book. It's illustrated. The art is beautiful. It's so cute. I read this in a bookstore when I had some extra time one day, and I am so glad I did. It was my first time reading a true illustrated kids book as an adult, but I really loved it, and I read it back in the beginning of October, and now it's January 1st, 2026, and I still am thinking about it like almost every day. I wish that it was a book that I had read or that I had access to when I was, 4 or 5 years old. I think, again, the art is so cute, and the messaging is also so good and so important for everybody, but especially for kids. We're all unique and we're all different, and that's what makes us beautiful, and we are all worthy exactly as we are. And that is the energy that I am taking with me into 2026, because again, 2025 was a doozy of a year. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I have some actual ideas for videos that I do want to film and get to this year, so I hope to be a little bit more proactive in this next year on here, on Instagram, on TikTok. Find me, details down below. Like, subscribe, comment if you feel so pleased. I would love to know what your standout reads of 2025 were, or maybe even like what your goals are for 2026, and they don't have to be anything outlandish. I think that one book is better than 0 books in a whole year, and yeah, it's really not about the numbers. It's about our thoughts and our feelings and our learning, and honestly just like getting away from the screen for a second, so yeah, okay, go back to the written word. It's so powerful, it's so profound. Here's to another year of spreading love and joy and good energy, because we all need more of that. Okay, bye.